All right. Well, good morning. Thanks for coming out, and we're going to talk a little bit about the DNA of an innovation ecosystem. And sort of what goes into that. With an ecosystem, I don't know if an innovation ecosystem has DNA, or whether it's it's a little bit like what Justice Stewart said about pornography. You sort of know it when you see it. But I do think there are distinct ingredients that, if you look around the different innovation ecosystems around the country and around the world that have been successful, I think there are definitely some key ingredients. Whether it's you have talent and you have capital, and you have the entrepreneurs, and I think when you get those three things together, you get a pretty good shot at creating an innovation ecosystem. And the reason I say that is, one of the places that I watched. I happened to be in Austin before I came to Chicago. I was there during the tech boom when Austin really took off and finally cemented itself as one of the country's tech centers. And so what happened there is, Dell Computer goes public, becomes a huge success, and that sort of puts them on the map forever. But they had been working at that for over a decade before that happened. So they had been laying the groundwork, and what they got together was the universities, or the University of Texas. So they get the talent piece, they get the commitment piece from the community that decides this is what we want to do, and they ultimately get the capital together as well. Then they get the last ingredient, and this is the one I think that's really sort of important when you're talking about innovation and ecosystems, is they have luck. And I think that's often really overlooked. So Dell goes public and becomes a big success and imports a ton of talent and really just makes that flywheel spin. But Michael Dell decides to stay home in Houston and go to Rice and drops out. Dell doesn't happen in Austin. Bill Gates, he decides to stay in New Mexico and work on his skiing. Microsoft doesn't happen in Seattle. Jeff Bezos decides that he really likes Wall Street and New York. Amazon doesn't happen, and Seattle's not one of those 5, 6, 7 tech cities that we all look at. So I think that's a really critical element. But Chicago has been laying that foundation for the last several years. One of those things that one of the earliest markers of that was something called 1871, which, thanks to J.B. Pritzker and some other folks, really sort of got the ball rolling, and as much as anything, sort of signaled outside of Chicago that there was a place for tech in Chicago. And that's what Kevin sort of got brought in to do and got it off the ground. So tell us a little bit about the early days of making that happen.
Yep. Hello, everybody. Thanks for having us. Excited to talk about Chicago and kind of the DNA of innovation that we've dealt with here over the last few years. Specifically, about 5 years ago, there was a lot going on in Chicago, as we all were seeing. You weren't here yet, but there was a lot of entrepreneurial activity going on, excitement, and all that kind of post-financial crisis and all that. So this little company called Groupon was starting to take off, and it had been on the cover of Fortune or Forbes, and they had said, fastest growing company ever, and a lot of folks from around the country said, where is this company? It must be in Silicon Valley, it must be in New York, it must be in Boston, maybe Seattle, and they were surprised to see that it was in Chicago, but it had been founded by these serial entrepreneurs, Brad Keywell and Eric Lefkofsky, and was really taken off. And that was kind of a bellwether moment, I think, for Chicago, in saying, we should be better at building great tech companies here. And so, at that time, there was a lot going on, but it was kind of fragmented around the city, in coffee shops, universities, people's back rooms of their apartments and all that. We needed more density in Chicago. And J.B. Pritzker, one of our kind of leading philanthropists and venture capitalists here, said, let's build a place, which wasn't kind of a new idea, but there had been places built in New York and Boston, like the Cambridge Innovation Center, and Seattle and San Francisco and other places to bring together entrepreneurs. But we really didn't have a good one here. So we set off to build a nonprofit that wasn't going to take equity in the companies, but was just going to build a place for the entrepreneurs to work side by side, learn from each other, learn from experts, get mentoring and all that. We invited all the venture capital firms in to bring capital, the universities to bring talent, programs like Techstars to bring programmatic approaches and all that. And we just kind of opened the doors and said, come on in and let's see if we can help build an ecosystem here. And today, I think it's recognized as one of the world's best kind of incubator spaces. It's 3 times or twice the size in terms of square footage, and really has, I think, been that central place that's brought together the tech community in Chicago.
Well, and the best indication of something successful going on is other people do it or you do more of it. And that's what happened at Northwestern. I mean, it's one of several places that we now have tech incubators around town. It wasn't just one downtown, there were a bunch of private ones started, and now the universities have them. So tell us a little bit about the garage at Northwestern.
Sure. So the garage is about a little over a year right now, and it was a very similar situation. So there were a lot of students at Northwestern, like Mark that you just met on stage, who were interested in entrepreneurship, but there was no place for them to go to meet each other. So similarly in Chicago, they were hiding in their dorm room, they're working out of coffee shops or faculty members' offices. And the university felt that it was important, like Chicago did, to build a place where those entrepreneurs could have a community and then bring together all of the resources of the university to help those entrepreneurs along their way. So the garage was built. It's an 11,000 square foot space located in a parking garage, part of the impetus for the name. And it's meant to be a hub for students that are interested in entrepreneurship and innovation. We incubate about 60 student-founded startups per quarter in the space. And then we bring together a number of great events that are really for students that are interested.
So how does having an incubator, universities generally are the place where you see a lot of entrepreneurs come from, see a lot of great ideas, you can trace, a lot of companies back to them. Why is it so critical to actually have a physical place on campus where you're encouraging the students? I mean, they're already sort of inclined to do startups. Why do you need to create an incubator? What's that do?
So again, it's really about the community. I think entrepreneurship, I was formerly an entrepreneur in Silicon Valley, and it can be a really lonely and hard journey, I think. And one of the great things about an entrepreneurial ecosystem is that often there's somebody who's kind of one step behind you that you can help pull up, and there's somebody who's one step ahead of you can help kind of pull you up too. So by having all of the students in one place and then connecting them to resources out in the community, to 1871, to Chicago Ventures where Kevin works, it really allows that ecosystem to blossom and for ventures to be more successful.
And I would add, if I could, what's been interesting about Chicago, where there wasn't a lot going on a few years ago, when we were able to get one of these places off the ground, that was really the low-hanging fruit. It was going after, your common kind of internet startup that doesn't need a lot of capital to get going and could, make a big impact and grow very quickly. But then the, folks from the healthcare world were like, what about us? We should have a place for us. And the folks from the manufacturing, the maker movement, it's like, well, we want a place. 1871 is not right for us, but we want to build our own. So we've seen, places like Matter, which is for healthcare entrepreneurs, a new place called M-Hub, which is for maker entrepreneurs, come online in the last couple of years. So it kind of, 1871 kind of allowed, I think, other places to get created. And as Northwestern did with the garage, University of Chicago, Illinois Institute of Technology, UIUC, I mean, all of the universities have built physical places on campus to bring together entrepreneurs and science and business and all that to help accelerate company growth. And that's great to see, because now we're starting to connect all the dots with them, and you're really seeing everything kind of rise all boats.
So how important internally and externally when you're building a technology or innovation ecosystem is place?
It's shocking, it's place, but it is place. Place matters.
Because it gives people a place that they can go and hang out with other people, or it also signals to people in Chicago as well as people outside of Chicago, hey, there's something going on here, here's where it's at. And why is that so important? And I think you're right, it's more important.
I would say we had a really simple insight that we pulled from going around the country and looking at other places before we built 1871. We needed to be on one floor. That was like absolutely critical. Like the size was, bigger, smaller, whatever, but it had to be on one floor, because you need to have that density and people running into each other in the hallways or at the coffee bar or at, in a conference room or whatever, and having multiple floors would keep people separated, and it really did matter. I mean, you see this.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. To me, the interaction seems to be really key. The sort of serendipity of bumping into somebody you either have been meaning to catch up with but hadn't, somebody whose name you knew but you never met. That sort of thing, I've seen it happen in 1871 a number of times. How important is that? It's somewhat intangible, but
I think the other piece of it is just for entrepreneurs to see the activity of other entrepreneurs. It kind of breeds some kind of both camaraderie but also competition, and it kind of lifts all of the teams and spurs them all to action, which is another great kind of secondary benefit of having a space.
And especially when they're, to your point, it's a showcase, right? I mean, some people call it the petting zoo for entrepreneurs, which is unfortunate, but it's a place where you can bring the CEO of XYZ massive Fortune 100 company and say, hey, look, there's actual entrepreneurs. It's far more powerful than showing them a video or PowerPoint slides or something like that. And then on the really cool side of things, we were open 2 weeks, you remember this, and NATO was in Chicago, and the British Prime Minister, David Cameron at the time, came by and visited the entrepreneurs and then, met with a bunch of CEOs and all that. But that was, that gave us so much cred because it was like you could hang out here and meet the British Prime Minister. And so ever since then, every tech leader, politician, we try and bring them through there because we want them to go away thinking Chicago's more than just, old school industries, that it's got some new stuff going on.
So help give folks in the crowd here some perspective on Chicago and tech and sort of where it was. So you and John DeCola opened the Google office here 15 years ago.
Right.
It's sort of, I guess, just after the dot-com bust. What did it look like then versus what it looks like now?
Yeah, I always like to say the dot-com boom came here late and left early. It just kind of went up and then it crashed and everybody kind of said, no harm, no foul. We didn't get into it. We're fine, right? We're not getting killed like the Valley right now. But I joined Google when Google was less than 200 people and we were opening a little sales office. We were schlepping keywords, right, back in 2000. And nobody had heard of the company. And especially in the Midwest, people didn't want to work with tech companies, especially Silicon Valley ones, because they felt like, they would just go bust and they, wouldn't be a good setup. So we had a really hard time getting people to pay attention to us and give us the time of day in terms of partners, ad agencies and CMOs and stuff like that. But over time, we built up our presence and we, performed for them and we had some good funding and we had some good backers and it, ultimately went public in 2004 and it kind of all, worked out over time. But Chicago was a tough place to be back then because there wasn't a lot going on. And the people who were in the know knew about folks like Dick Costello building FeedBurner here. I mean, Orbitz was a little more famous. Tickets Now, which Ticketmaster acquired, early ticket marketplace, was here. We actually estimated, I think that we had $100 million plus exits over that 10-year span, but nobody's really heard of the companies, and so it was kind of under the radar. So it wasn't until Groupon, as I mentioned earlier, that we really kind of started to get a little bit more cred. And since then, as we know, there's been a lot of great exit activity from Grubhub to Fieldglass to CleverSafe to Trunk Club. So,
well, the interesting thing is, Google has come full circle. They now have a building in the West Loop. They've got somewhere, I think, on the order of 700 or 800 employees. They were the catalyst for the redevelopment of an entire part of the city. There's a whole bunch of real estate, a whole bunch of property owners who owe a great debt to Google and the landlord there. But the interesting thing now is, Google now has over 100 engineers in Chicago. One of its more important products, technology products, is run out of Chicago. So I think that gives you a sense of sort of how it evolved and the size of the ecosystem.
Uber, LinkedIn, Twitter. I mean, every major tech company has a large presence here now.
Right. And I think a lot of that was, some of it was opportunistic. I think a lot of it was deliberate, some of it accidental. To your point, one of the things that this applies to Chicago specifically, I've seen it in a lot of other cities where they're really trying to sort of get a much better presence in the innovation economy. And it's about playing to your strengths and not your weaknesses. And in Chicago, one of the interesting things here is the economy is very diverse. It's everything from transportation to manufacturing and consulting and law and everything in between. So that's great economically in that Chicago generally doesn't get taken out really fast or early by a recession in any one industry. It's very diverse. The challenge when you're particularly in tech, when you're trying to promote yourself to the rest of the world, is they don't know what you do. You don't do one thing particularly well. In Austin, they were a semiconductor and software town. That's easy for people to get their head around. We have a very, very diverse tech economy, and it's everything from biotech to consumer e-commerce and a whole bunch of other stuff in between. I think that's interesting. I think it's healthy. I think it's a big asset for Chicago, but it also makes it really hard to tell your story outside of the city. So, what's your sort of view on that in terms of whether it's the asset or the liability? If you're the person trying to build that economy.
Absolutely. I think the one, kind of the industry that gets referenced here a lot is that Chicago is great at enterprise businesses and building B2B. And that's great. You should always play to your strengths and start where you're the strongest. But if I had to make a prediction for kind of the next wave of where we see tech going, software and hardware is very much blending together. So you're not really just a software company or a hardware company or both. You see that in Snapchat, with their announcement with Spectacle. You saw it with Google's announcement today. You saw it with my last student up here who are playing on the hardware and software. And I think that's something that Chicago could actually really become known for. We have strong manufacturing history here. We're good at building things. And we have really, really strong universities with a lot of strong engineering talent. So you put those two things together, and I think that's something that could really help put Chicago on the map.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think? What do you think are some of the big things that are still missing from the ecosystem here, or things we need to get better at to sort of get to the next level?
Want me to start?
Yeah.
My answer would be culture. Part of my job at the Garage is to build a space on campus that feels different. When you walk into the Garage, it doesn't feel like a university. It feels a lot like a tech company. And that's on purpose. We have polished cement floors. We have murals and color and a pink flamingo and astroturf lawn. I mean, things that you wouldn't really see in academia. And that's on purpose. I want to kind of create a safe space for the students where they are free to experiment. It's kind of, I talk about like the whimsy of innovation. If you go to Google, I started on the Google's main campus in Mountain View. People are wearing t-shirts and flip-flops, and it's very casual by design, because I think you have to kind of be relaxed in order to innovate. So what we've created at the Garage is a space where it's safe to innovate, and I hope that more of my students will be willing to take the risk and to try something new. We celebrate failure, as you should in any entrepreneurial community, to learn from things that you've tried that are new. And worst case, if my students are not successful, they'll be very prepared for the modern workplace, and they can go on to work at other startups that spring up here in Chicago or elsewhere.
Yep. I would add, and I totally agree.
Sure.
And I think that takes time. I mean, I think we need to, kind of work through that over, a couple of cycles here, right? I think we're kind of into our second cycle, and you're starting to see entrepreneurs who have had success sell their companies and then start new companies, and the recycling of talent and capital and serial entrepreneurs building companies will help solve that over time. From an investor standpoint, with our fund, we like to look at folks who come out of industry that know the problem that they're trying to solve, right? It seems very obvious. But in the Midwest, you're going to find more folks that come out of a manufacturing business or a logistics business or a food tech business. Like 3 of our last investments have been alumni of Coyote Logistics, alumni of Peapod, and alumni of, what's the last one? Well, there's a gaming one, but thinking about like how do we pull people out of industry? Oh, Discovery Communications, our company Curiosity.com came out of there. So you have different companies that spin people out, and then we back them, and they know how to build their companies, but they know that problem they're trying to solve. And then this is the problem that we need to solve: is let's get local companies buying local companies. Like a lot of our acquisitions of companies here are bought by SAP or IBM or someone outside of Chicago. They leave the companies here, they don't move them, but we need to have our own kind of platform companies here ultimately, or at very least have our Fortune 100 buying companies locally.
It only takes one, but you do have to have one. I mean, I can't think of another. One of the other top tech ecosystems around the country, and eventually it'll happen. And I think fortune favors the prepared mind, and I think that laying the groundwork is crucial, because then when you do get the success, you really turn it into something, as opposed to everybody going, "Oh, that was a flash in the pan. That happened by accident," and it never gets replicated. And I think that's sort of the difference between really successful innovation ecosystems and small ones. So
Can I throw out one more thing? I would just say we go around the Midwest a lot, and a lot of cities in the Midwest want to become, have this DNA of innovation and become a tech ecosystem. And you were saying how people come visit you all the time, and how do we build this on our campus, or how do we build this in our city? And the reality is you need to have certain core pieces like talent, like capital, like, great universities, like Fortune 500s, around. And not every city has that. So it's going to be a little more challenging for some, but ultimately if they commit to doing it and learn from lessons of others, I think they can.
yeah, I think it would be incredibly hard without the university piece. I don't know how. That's really hard because it's just such an amazing asset. If you look at every one of the really significant innovation ecosystems, this morning, you get a Nobel Prize winner out of Northwestern. That chemistry department up there is amazing, and it's translated into a lot of companies. I can point to a half dozen right out of there. So I think it's crucial. We're going to take some questions. So.
Tweet Thornton. I was wondering, how does Chicago rank with its political culture, and when is it better to ask for forgiveness rather than ask for permission?
Give it a shot.
Gosh, I think it's always better to ask for forgiveness.
Right. It's an entrepreneur.
Like I will with the answer to this question. That's just part of kind of the entrepreneurial DNA. I don't think that the political climate has much to do with it. I think you've seen great innovations happen at every time in history. I think it takes just that can-do attitude to push through and, again, ask for forgiveness later.
In not being partisan in any way, I think we've had really strong support from our both our local, city, county, and state government at various points along the way. I mean, 1871 was built with half of it was a grant from the state of Illinois, which, go state of Illinois. It doesn't get a lot of good pub. And that was our former governor, and now we have a Republican governor who's done a lot of great stuff around connecting university talent like UIUC up to Chicago and all that. Mayor Emanuel has been a huge supporter of all this tech, Cook County Commissioner, or President Preckwinkle. So we've gotten the support, but I think the theme is try and help with your bully pulpit if you can with dollars, but hopefully with the right incentives involved, but don't get in the way,
Right.
Because they can really screw things up too.
And I suspect you're talking about the political climate broadly. Is that a disadvantage? Oh, got it. No, the political support here has been probably as good as any place I can think of, because everybody was pulling on the oar, which I think is unique, and I think it's helpful. I think 1871 was a very good example of that. It sort of happened over time, and there were multiple administrations locally and at the state level, and I don't think anybody balked, And so they've had good buy-in, good support, and that's crucial. You need it to happen.
This question is about recycling people. Do you have any use for retired people in acting as mentors or unpaid advisors to the young entrepreneurs?
I certainly do. So we have a mentor network of about 150 individuals we've vetted so far. Many have been entrepreneurs. Many are Northwestern alums. Some are not. Some are just here locally in Chicago. We've been experimenting with virtual mentors who are on the coast and other places that contribute time and their energy to working with the students. I think my students are really brilliant, many of them. The thing that they lack, though, is kind of the experience of life and having lived through a lot of things. And so that's something, and they don't have networks because of that, and they don't have a lot of experience. So that's something that they rely on heavily to get from their mentors.
Absolutely agree. I mean, the ecosystem here thrives on mentorship from people who've been there and done it, and the response that we get. I mean, 1871, we have this wall, this chalkboard by design that has just lists of names of people and what they're experts in, marketing and finance and tech and other things. And it's literally hundreds of people, and they all do, out of the goodness of their heart, mentorship. They just show up, they get matched with entrepreneurs, and it's kind of speed mentorship, 30-minute sessions, and it's so valuable because we can't pay for that. We just, it's a nonprofit, you can't afford that. You've got to have people volunteer their time and expertise, so absolutely.
We also do a weekly event that we call Family Dinner, where we invite kind of a prominent founder or investor to come speak to the students. And we ask them to not tell kind of the Wall Street Journal version of their story, but kind of the raw version, talk about things that weren't always successful or the bumps along the way. Kevin was one of our guest speakers who came up, which was great. Tonight we're having a prominent restaurateur come in. So I think it's just, there's a couple ways. You can either learn by living or you can learn by those that have lived. It's great.
All right,
I think we're out of time.
we are. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.